Good afternoon. I'd like to call the informational meeting to order right now for Monday, September 17th, 2007. And we'll start with our staff report, our City Council staff report. Deborah Owen, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Sioux Falls City Council. Just a couple of things to bring up today. Just to remind everyone, there is no joint meeting today at the Minnehaha County Building. Also, there's been requests by the public to move up number 42, which is the veto, to the beginning of the regular agenda. And so if council agrees to make that motion tonight at the 7 o'clock meeting. I believe that's it.
Thank you very much. For our mayor's update today, we're going to ask Kevin Smith, our Assistant Public Works Director, to come forward and give us an update on Lewis and Clark business.
Good afternoon, Kevin Smith with the Office of Public Works. This morning, Gary Caldwell, Gene Rowenhorst, and I did meet with the Lewis and Clark Construction Committee to discuss possible alternatives. There's still been no decision on the bid award. We are pursuing, I'd say, parallel paths in interim alternative financing mechanisms, more so on Lewis and Clark's behalf, and also pursuing kind of a peer review on the design of the plant that would include members of the City of Sioux Falls and our consultants. So we're trying to figure out, is there an engineering solution and or is there a financial solution to the situation as well? Most of that work will be done hopefully in the next week or two, and there are, I believe, options as far as extending the bid another 30 days if the low bidder agrees to it, and Gary might be able to speak to that a little more if you have any other questions.
Councilor Stagers.
Yeah, Kevin, has there been any thought about just not doing that central water purification plant, and then just having the other communities, you know, get their own purification plants?
Well, at this point, I would say no alternatives are off the table. What we know is Lewis and Clark has a portion of the well field constructed. They have the raw water line constructed, and they have a significant amount of the transmission line open or constructed. And what we would like to do is have the engineers and the water supply experts look at every possible alternative and see what can be done. So that issue specifically has not been addressed, but certainly we're as interested in as everyone else is in finding a unique solution to this, if one does exist.
Councilor Benica.
Kevin, can you remind us what the capacity of our water treatment plant is, if in fact we were to do this on our own?
Well, we have a project next year that would bring us up to a firm treatment capacity of approximately 70 million gallons per day. Right now, I believe our firm capacity is about 52 million gallons a day.
And if in fact we can't come to a solution, is there a way to increase capacity on the water treatment plant that we have in our CIP?
Well, this next expansion will pretty much max us out as far as treatment capacity of our own. But again, that's with the project next year, we're going to increase capacity by about 18 million gallons a day, which is quite a bit more than I'd say even the rest of the members of Lewis and Clark need.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Costello.
What would be our capacity to distribute any water that we might treat for the rest of the Lewis and Clark? I mean, we get the water up here and we treat it, and I assume there's a fair amount of customers that we could reach within a limited area, but I mean, the Lewis and Clark project extends to areas far beyond whatever we would be able to distribute treated water to, doesn't it?
Yes, and in fact, we are already delivering treated water to two of the other members,
Right.
T and Harris, actually three, T in Harrisburg and Lincoln Rural Water. There would be engineering solutions to do that, whether it's a smaller treatment facility halfway between here and Vermilion, or different distribution system improvements that would have to be made. It is not what Lewis and Clark initially envisioned with the project, but we certainly know that that there are multiple solutions.
So those solutions are all being considered.
Absolutely. They will be.
Councilor Litz.
Kevin, is a value engineering thing that we're going to look at for the bids that are already out there?
Well, there was a value engineering study done 2 years ago on the project, but that was when the estimated cost of the treatment plant was $78 million. So I wouldn't say this necessarily represents a full-blown value engineering study. It's going to be more of a peer review and kind of a design workshop with some very talented people looking at what some of those costs were and maybe even some alternative treatment methods that weren't considered during the VE study 2 years ago. We really don't want to tie the hands of the people who are going to look at this and say, okay, but you're going to stay inside this box for alternatives. Our position is, look, if you come up with a different way and still meet the needs of the customers or of the members of Lewis and Clark, it should be looked at.
Any other questions for Mr. Smith? Yes, sorry. Gary,
I
go
have
ahead.
one other issue to bring up at this time, if that's all right with the
Okay,
chair.
all right. Go ahead. Our city attorney, Gary Colwell, for the listening audience.
Deborah Owen and I have been talking today about how to deal with item 42, which will be on tonight's agenda, which, of course, the veto override. We have studied it in the city attorney's office, and Deborah has studied it also. The veto override will not require a motion and a second. It's an automatic action that is required by the city charter. The question that will be posed to the body is, should the mayor's veto be overridden? It will take 6 votes to override the veto. The mayor will begin item 42 with public input, move to council council discussion, and then when the discussion ends, we'll proceed directly to a vote. Again, the question would be, should the mayor's veto be overridden?
Thank you. Are there any questions for the city attorney on that topic? Okay, and Kevin Smith, thank you for your update also. I'm sorry I forgot to tell you that. Let's run through our committee reports as we usually do. We'll start with the Audit Committee. Councilor Kavanaugh.
No report.
Okay, the Fiscal Committee, Councilor Costello.
No report.
Okay, this is going quickly. Land Use Committee, Councilor Jameson.
That'll be answered with the presentation by Kevin and, not Kevin, but Mark Cotter concerning our last meeting.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And Public Services Committee, I know Councilor Brown is not here quite yet today, but Councilor Staggers, would you like to give any update from our Public Services Committee on campaign finance that just ended a few minutes ago?
Yeah, we adjourned sine die. We're not going to have any more committee meetings. And what we're anticipating is having a presentation at the Informational on 1 October. And then hopefully on 9 October, we'll have the first reading of the ordinance.
Thank you. Under open discussion, just a couple quick things from me. As just a friendly reminder that we have next Monday, instead of an informational, we are going on I'm sure, a very informative tour of our city landfill. And that is scheduled to start right on time, 4 o'clock, and we will be picked up right here. And again, the public is very welcome the press, is very welcome to join us on that tour, and I suppose the public too if there's room. But anyway, just know that that's scheduled from 4 to 6 on Monday, the 24th of September. And then another friendly reminder is that the Charter Revision Commission will hold its first, working meeting on next Thursday already, the 27th of September, right here at Carnegie, and they will start at 3:30 p.m. And I know that they welcome input from all of the public, and of course that includes city council, city staff, and so forth. So I just wanted to make that reminder too. It doesn't seem possible that we could be to the end of September already. And then also in your mailboxes today, you had some more travel information regarding staff travel since 2002. And so again, I assume that the travel committee when Councilor Jameson wants to start calling that group, working group, study group together, he will do so. And that's all from me for open discussion. Anything from any of you before our presentations? Councilor Stagers?
Yes, I was talking to a former city elected official yesterday on the phone, and this individual wanted me to express to the city council a great deal of concern about the Charter Commission and the law dealing with open meetings. This individual, quite frankly, wanted some action to be taken, but once again, this is a former elected city official that expressed this concern to me.
Okay. One other topic I wanted to just mention to you, and would you just kind of start thinking really hard about this area? Just a reminder that January 8th is the first day for the 2008 legislative session. That doesn't seem possible that that's ready to begin again either, and it'll be a short session this year, 35 days, as you well know. And so I've just been kind of thinking about what topics have we discussed among ourselves in the last year that we want to maybe bring some legislators in, even in small groups, and talk to them before the legislature begins. I always think it's so hectic after they start that if, would you just kind of start giving me a list of ideas? I mean, some just, thoughts. I mean, I just think our roads we just need so much more revenue on roads. I mean, I'd love to see us consider, I'd love to see the legislature consider raising the gas tax. I think our auto registration rates are incredibly low nationally. I know they're based on weight and age of car. We've talked, some of us have talked a little bit about maybe seeing if we could get the legislature to increase the surcharge on phone bills to pay more for metro communications. And again, those are not city council ideas. Those are just my ideas, just for starters. So I don't want them. I'm not speaking for you guys. But I just think now is the time we should start putting a master list together. I know we always have kind of a nice generic list, but I think we need a good list. Oh, and also the Homeless Coalition meets this Thursday in the new Siouxland Health and Human Services building on the second floor in their conference room at 11:45. And so that's another reminder on that important topic. Any other open discussion items? Okay, with that, we'll go to our presentations. And first of all, we'll have a presentation regarding, this will be an update on the 69th Street and Southeastern Avenue annexation proposal. And this will be presented by the TV real estate people, Ted Toms and Dick Gregerson, a lawyer representing the group, I believe.
Madam Chairman, members of the council, my name is Dick Gregerson, and I represent Ted Toms and several of his associates in the acquisition of property on 69th Street. My original intent today was to address the lift station policy that's been considered by the city and will be adopted by the council. We were going to ask for some changes. On reflection, we feel that the lift station policy that has been adopted is a good one, and so I'm appearing here today to support that lift station. As far as the lift station policy, as far as the annexation of the property on 69th Street, we're still working on that. I'm not prepared at this time to discuss that, but we will be presenting it to the council at a later date. So, and if I may, Madam Chairman, take a matter of personal privilege. Some of you probably are aware I'm on the Highway Commission, South Dakota Highway Commission. There are 9 commissioners. And what we're doing this month, we're going to meet in Sioux Falls. We feel it's important, we usually meet in Pierre, but we feel it's important to get out among the various towns and cities and hold meetings so that the public can attend. And we're meeting on the 27th of this month, Thursday at 9 o'clock, out at the new highway building. That's 5316 West 60th Street North. and it begins at 9 o'clock. And on behalf of the Highway Commission, I want to extend to you an invitation to attend the meeting. I feel it's very important that the other council or other commissioners from around the state see what's going on in Sioux Falls. Because they're all low, we work well together, there is competition. And each commissioner is trying to get something for his own area. And I think a lot of the commissioners are not aware of the rapid expansion going on in Sioux Falls and the demands for the infrastructure. So after the meeting, we have a bus, and we're going to take the other council commissioners around Sioux Falls, show them projects and explain it. And we'd also welcome you. We'll have a big enough bus. We would like to invite all of the council members to accompany us on that tour. So with that, I hope some of you will be able to attend. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that invitation. Councilor Kavanaugh.
Just
Mr.
a
Gregerson.
question. Thanks for the invitation, Dick. Do you just off the top of your head, what's the geographic distribution of the 9, did you say, that are on
9.
Yeah.
Well, it's, for instance, we're in the Mitchell district. There's 2 of us. It was George Shantard and I think most of you probably know George, for a number of years. Now it's, there's a new councilman from Mitchell that was just appointed. There's another one, Ralph Marquardt, he's down in Yankton. There's 2 out in Rapid City. Let's see, there's one in down by Gregory. Did I hit 9? I'm not sure.
I think so.
But that's somewhat of the break. Oh, then Aberdeen and Watertown also.
Mr. Gregerson, how often does the South Dakota Highway Commission meet?
Once a month. And we always meet on the 4th Thursday of every month. And we usually in Pierre, but now, like I say, we're trying to emulate the Supreme Court and get out and because I think it's important for the public to be able to attend, and it's difficult to come to Pierre. It's a long ways.
Thank you
So
again for
again,
the
I hope
invitation.
some of you will be able to be with us.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Toms, you'd like to add something here?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It should be noted that the South Minnesota Avenue work that's being done by the state is totally as a result of the representation of Commissioner Gregerson. That would not have happened without him. Enough about Dick. We're not, I don't want to misstate or our people to misstate, we're not totally enamored with the lift station policy. We're not done studying it yet either. So we want to come back to you later with more thoughts on that. The one thing, I didn't intend to do this, but I'm going to have to be the cheerleader because he's not here, but this document is a document between Triad, which is Varick and Company, and my partner and I. Dated you? Oh, speak up. What this does is it provides the sewer that we've been trying to put together to the Ackerman and Stenberg properties. Those are 2 properties that were annexed 3 years ago this October, yet don't have infrastructure. This would bring the sewer to them. To the Hayes property on the corner of 69th. To our property eventually. So all the neighborhoods there, and there he is right there. And Vance Goldhammer represents the Hayes, and there's Joe Hayes, and Mrs. Hayes. In any event, I know that some of the council was concerned, or were concerned with where the sewer business was headed. Why all this consternation about annexation if you don't have sewer? We've resolved that. We've agreed to finance the sewer on a loan basis to our neighbors to help facilitate that getting in place next summer. We've acquired some additional land to round out the annexation and the use of the sewer. So it sounds like your next information will be in a couple of weeks. We'll come back then and hopefully have the rest of the story. Thanks.
And you will go ahead and request that through the regular channels and so forth with the city clerk's office and so forth to get on that agenda, please? Okay. Is there anything else on your update that? Okay. All right, then we'll move on to the next item then for today, and thank you for that update. So our other item for today's informational is the policy, the proposed policy, I really should say, on the temporary pump stations and force mains, and our very capable Director of Public Works, Mark Cotter, and Jeffrey Schmidt and Mark Perry will give us an update on this proposed policy.
Good afternoon. Mark Cotter with the Office of Public Works. We've got a good policy here that was initiated just shortly after May. There is a group of people that will be shared with you here, who the committee members were, the frequency of the meetings, but also really what we intended to get out of this, which is a really good, predictable system as we start to plan growth, and that first layer being sewer. We've brought this to the Land Use Committee September 4th. The next day we brought it to the IRAB Committee. That board voted unanimously to accept it. I appreciate that the Tom's Group has also endorsed it tonight, and knowing that there's some items that they don't agree with. And then tonight is the informational item. So tonight we have two presenters that were key to putting this policy together, Mark Perry, the principal engineer, and Jeff Schmidt, the assistant director of planning. I will do some summary comments and answer some questions for you once we get there. Thanks. Mark Perry.
Thank you very much. Jeffrey Schmidt from the City Planning Office. What really prompted this policy was when we first started back in September, the developers had asked frequently in the past to develop outside of the gravity sewer areas and in small increments that were inefficient to serve. What we wanted to try to do was to make sure that our goal was to not stop development, but to move growth along in an orderly fashion, and what the IRAB and the developers had asked for is if they could have some guidelines.
Mark Perry with engineering. One of the first steps that we took was to form a subcommittee, which was made up of the Home Builders Association representative, private utilities representative, developers, consultants, and city staff. And what we did was take the City of Lincoln's policy for lift stations and use that as an example and built off of that. And we also reviewed Sioux Falls' growth and development policies.
When we looked at growth and development, this was the first stage of the development and the committee wanted to look at. Currently, we plat approximately 1,100 acres a year. When we project forward and we look for 20, 30 years into the future, we are projecting forward between 728 and 1,149 acres a year, and these are land use acres. Back in 1996, when we did the growth management plan, we showed 19,000 acres in our 2015 plan. In 2003, we showed almost 24,000 acres in our future land use plan. Currently, as we're looking forward, the 2007 plan that's in draft stage has 32,000 acres being shown in our future land use plan. In the 2015 plan, it states that we should have planned and future urbanized area. The 2015 plan has a section in the back of it entitled phasing, and the phasing section talks about that you should be available to do immediate development, midterm development, and near-term development. Each one of those has different sections and definitions within the growth management plan based upon what type of infrastructure is available and how it's being programmed in the CIP. Lincoln, Nebraska defines it as tiers, and they have this little quote within their tiers that states, however, the community does not have the financial resources, nor is it necessary to provide urban services to all the Tier 1 area within the next few years. So, within Tier 1, the community needs to prioritize areas for infrastructure improvements. That's the general premise that we used when we went into this policy. Again, the definitions that we're using as we move forward, we have a planned area. That area has been annexed and zoned in the City of Sioux Falls, but does not have building occupancy, but it's been planned. We have a future area, which is the land within our growth management boundaries. It generally shows a 2020, 2030 growth management area. Tier 1 is the land which is served by projects within the adopted 5-year CIP. It's the projects that have infrastructure to it. And then that Tier 2 is the area that's outside the CIP within the 6 to 15-year process. The purpose of the city's gravity sanitary sewer system has served the community well for decades. It is the most efficient and cost-effective system for the citizens and the ratepayers for the City of Sioux Falls, and the temporary pump stations and force mains shall only be used if the criteria in this policy are met. The first real challenge that we have as we set down those background guidelines is the committee wanted to know, okay, how much land do we currently have for planned urbanized areas? We currently have 9,600 acres of planned urbanized area in the City of Sioux Falls. And remember, that's the area that's already been annexed in the City of Sioux Falls and zoned, but does not have any building occupancy on it. It's still to be constructed upon it. We have a 10-year growth cycle ready to go right now without any building occupancy. The service area requirements that we looked at next after realizing how much land that was available was that we should look at temporary pump stations and force mains should only be allowed in the Tier 1 area, and the Tier 1 area being the land that could be serviced by the CIP projects. If it wasn't being served by the CIP projects, why would we be looking at it? The second section was that temporary, and temporary would be defined again within the CIP timeframes and shall mean a period up to 5 years. And then to define that even further down was that we would work with the applicant to help define temporary and come up with a plan indicating how that pump station would be eliminated in the future with the gravity line.
Additional service area requirements were split out into the location of pump stations. The developer would be responsible for all the costs involved in acquiring the land and the right-of-way and easements. The pump station would be required to be located at the end of or along a planned gravity sanitary trunk sewer. As Jeff just discussed, it would have to be in the 5-year CIP plan. The receiving sanitary sewer trunk sewer must have the capacity based on current and projected full basin build-out, so that the basin that this would be pumped into would not be cut short if additional flow was added to it. Additional requirements for service areas would be pump stations to benefit and serve a single property owner would be discouraged in the plan. And what we looked at was a number of acres, and the number of acres, the minimum number of acres that the group decided on was 200. The area to be served by the pump stations must be contiguous to the city limits is another requirement. We also looked at basins with sewer capacity and without sewer capacity. The ones listed up on the board are the ones with capacity. 13, 14, and 15 are on the west side of town. 17, 18, 20, and 26 would be on the east side of town.
As we continue to look at the service area, whether or not that area can be serviced, now that you know what basins can be served and where you need to place the pump station, we need to look at what are the impacts to the other services within that basin. So that information would be based again on the phasing plan of the growth management plan, which has been adopted. We would look at the infrastructure necessary to serve the entire sub-basin. We'd also work to address the impacts that the development would have on the sub-basin on capital and other operating budgets within that area, and that there would be a demonstrative substantial public benefit. We spent some time with the committee defining and looking at what substantial public benefit was. And again, if you remember, this was one of the challenges we had the last time around. a significant benefit to the City of Sioux Falls and approved by City Council, looking at community facilities, land dedication, affordable housing, employment opportunities, or other public benefit designed to ensure and preserve the community's character and natural resources.
We also looked at in the policy design standards that went along with the engineering design standards. The length of the force main was placed in the document because it has an impact on odors downstream, and so there was mention of that. We required that the developer notify affected property owners within the area so that if they were interested in joining in on the pump station area, service area, that they could. We set construction standards. We also indicated in the document that the developer would be required to pay the cost recovery of the receiving stream. The pump station design specifications for the city would need to be followed. Any third-party connections we listed in there as the developer would have the possibility of obtaining a private cost recovery to recuperate some of his lift station and force main costs if he so desired. The ownership and operation and maintenance of the lift station, it would be owned by the developer and operated and maintained by the city. The developer would need to pay 5 years worth of operation and maintenance costs, or if it went longer than 5 years, whatever it took. We also talked about decommissioning the lift station and had quite a bit of discussion about that. And when it all played out, the station really wasn't worth much for the developer, so the city, we put in there that the city would have full salvage rights of the station because we could make better use of the parts, and we would decommission the station and take the parts.
The city process, when we're looking at this policy, is that this policy is approved by City Council as a resolution. At the same time, this resolution would be amended at least annually because there's two things that have to be looked at as it moves forward, is the basins that Mark's already referred to, and there's a map that's associated with it so that the public, at least at public hearings and a public hearing standpoint, would be able to look at the resolution and see what's been available or not available. The developer's process, and again, this is kind of a linear process that they would go through. Just this quick summary of what we've just explained. The area needs to be contiguous to the City of Sioux Falls. It needs to be within Tier 1, which has CIP projects to it. The area needs to address a 5-year decommissioning plan, as well as looking at other utilities and substantial public benefit. They need to look at some design criteria for location, area served, and working with other property owners. They have to have receiving line capacity. They have to address the right-of-way and easements, looking at operation, repair, and maintenance costs. Once that's done, then they can move forward to annexation. This is one of many growth management tools that we have, as well as what we'd like to bring forward to IRAB, Infrastructure Review Advisory Board, sanitary sewer, a tier process. We're also looking at the roads and the waters and coordinating them, the drainage of public facilities. We're using 5-year time periods based on CIP, as well as looking out for this CIP 5-year time period and each 5-year subsequent. And it's really trying to get us more and more involved in the CIP planning process. Additional things that we will continue to be working on is that the policy is for public pump stations. Private pump stations are not allowed. We do need to continue to work with IRAB, which we've been doing for the last year in regards to subdivision ordinance amendments to address utility coordinations within planned preliminary subdivision plans and continue to address the substantial public benefit. As we mentioned at the beginning, the purpose, we believe we've done a good job continuing to this conclusion. The goal has not been to stop development, but to move growth along in this orderly fashion and give guidelines. The committee was very strong at the end that this gave them a good guideline. It gave them the structure they needed to know going into it what to expect.
Just a couple closing comments here on the remaining slides. And thank you, Mark and Jeff, for presenting. I think one of the things that you have asked us is to really come back with an infrastructure management plan that accounts for everything from our bottom layer, which is our first layer of sanitary sewer, and then our next item is to plan for our regional BMPs, get the streets, which also includes the water main, but all the other assets of the street in there, and then other costs of growth. Sanitary sewer, as they said, was if we do truly absorb about 1,000 acres a year, and right now we have just over 10,000 acres annexed and not building permit occupied. And then we also have the opportunity now with the first phase of the East Side Sewer. That is the first phase that is adding an additional 10,000 acres. So we're nearing almost a 20-year supply of sewerable land. And so one of the first things that the committee looked at is, do we have a supply issue? And just those figures told us that we don't initially, and we also have, for the planning period out, many more acres that can be added on as growth continues. The other piece of this is, as you look at that graphic, and just to look at it in graphical sense, as you extend that box of sanitary sewer either to the right or the left, you also know that there's an accentuating effect above it, that we have more regional BMPs to plan for and pay for. Then as you look at the arterial streets, right now this week's IRAB meeting is going to hear a more detailed presentation on what we're planning for to retire the cost of those large water mains on the mile lines, and that's a new platting fee that's been adopted by the Alternative Financing Committee. Once we work through the IRAB board, we will bring that back to you, along with, at the same time, a solution to catch up our arterial streets and also build what we expect needs to be built for the next 5-year plan. That backlog alone is almost an $80 million backlog of arterial streets. And then the last piece, just to highlight some other key points of what the cost of growth is, are listed there, and I'll just let you read those. But there's many things that we take very seriously when we look at items like this. I think that the process that took place would have happened regardless if we would have had a contemplating development on the table or not. It truly is backed by engineering principles, and then behind that becomes the funding mechanisms to fund growth. Our schedule would be to bring this back before you. It is a resolution. There's a resolution bolted onto this policy, and so we would bring that back to you at the second Monday. It'll actually be a Tuesday in October 9th for your ratification. And then the last 2 pages of your presentation are the smaller maps that complement the larger ones. So with that, do you have any questions for myself, Mark Perry, Jeff Schmidt? We also have Trent Lubers, our division manager for the Water Reclamation Division, here as well.
Councilor Costello.
Mark, on one of the maps that you've provided, I'm just trying to get a grasp for the growth timeline. Some of these are marked 2008 and 9, some are 2010. The very southeast part is marked 2014, 2016. Are they just kind of general areas, or do you have specific boundaries for these growth areas on the map?
Well, as you'll see that there is some irregular lines, and those are irregular because they follow the topography of the land, which is sewerable. Those areas are, and I'll let Jeff Schmidt also reinforce this, but there is planning timelines because we either have utilities there or we are planning to have utilities there. The one that you bring up in the lower right, which is 2014 plus or 2016 plus, that's a range because our first objective there is to allow growth to continue out to the east. And then once we have a certain amount of flow that goes to our new main lift station, we will construct the new wastewater treatment plant, which is right next to that lift station. that needs to be in place, so we have a place for the lift station to pump to, which is down near 101st Street. And so we are trying to take, based on what is annexed and what we expect to come in, just tracking with that and knowing that we've got a planning period ahead of us and knowing that we've got a somewhat of a predictable growth, that 2014 came down there. Right now in the CIP plan, you have in 2011 is that wastewater plant.
So all that stuff that's in 2014, 2016 is dependent on that, all those sewer lines and...
That's correct. As you, Pat, as you look at that and as you see the wastewater treatment plant,
Yep.
let me go to this. As you see the wastewater treatment plant, and then you take that red line back to the west and then south, that is the force main. I'll point to it here. Here's the wastewater treatment plant, the proposed one. And then this is a force main that goes down to this future lift station. And this will be the lift station, and then these green lines are the gravity sewer lines that will serve this area, which includes the TV group's land for about 2/3 of their land that's not currently sewerable. Okay? I answer your question, Pat?
Thank you.
Yes, Councilor Kavanaugh?
Thanks, Mark, for the presentation. Memory serves me, when we scheduled this, there was an indication that the IREB had passed this unanimously, but there was healthy discussion. Can you give me a little insight as to what that means?
Well, we have a lot of healthy discussion. I think this is certainly since probably April when it went to IRAB. There was substantial healthy discussion that then we also brought it back to you in May to give you an update on the current proposal and the current concerns that are presented. At that point, we went into meeting every week and developing a policy. At the last time we went to IRAB to present it to them, those concerns from the TV group, I understand, aren't completely gone away, but they're going to support the policy. And so there was a couple of key concerns in there that that was debated. One of them was instead of 5 years, it should be 10 years. And there was a number of things. But the key thing is there's a fixed criteria if a lift station qualifies, and some of the criteria was being debated.
The 5 years versus 10 would be development timeline?
Would actually be the timeline that a lift station could be in place, which our struggle with that is if it goes beyond 5 years. And the second thing is if it's able to go outside of Tier 1, which is in the next planning period, we essentially, in our mind, don't have a policy. And so our position that day was to recommend to the board to not accept those changes, and that's why the board did not.
Thank you.
Councilor, did you have a question? Okay, Councilor Staggers?
Oh, no, I didn't.
Okay, sorry, Councilor Litz, please.
Mike, on your first map that shows the pump stations, the green ones are ones that will operate, and there's a few future ones, and then the red ones are ones that were recently decommissioned. What was the ages of the recently decommissioned pump stations, and what is a typical price? What price range would you be looking at if you were a developer to install them?
Let me have Mark Perry address both those comments. We've had good discussion on both, and the various stages when these 5 lift stations were put in. Mark can give some history to that.
I just want to verify that you're looking at this exhibit.
This one, yeah.
Oh, okay.
There's 5 red recently decommissioned pumps.
Okay. And the age of those vary. Some of them on the east side of town were probably approximately about 10 to 15 years old. And on the west side of town, they're quite a bit older, lift stations up to probably 20 to possibly 30 years old, in that range. And you had another question, too.
Yeah, the price range. If I was
And the price range, if you were going to install a lift station nowadays, varies greatly upon the depth. and the soil conditions that where you put it. We've had them recently put in the ground anywhere from $150,000 to $400,000 plus for the smaller type of stations.
I have a follow-up question for either one of you on that. Is regardless of wherever TV is on the lift station proposal, I mean, regardless of wherever they are or what they're thinking these days, I myself am struggling with the fact that our proposal talks about 5 years when in fact we have 5 lift stations that have been decommissioned recently that have been there for way more than 5 years. So I really am missing the logic of that. So can someone help me? Why am I missing this? What am I missing?
Counselor, I can at least start that discussion. I think one of the factors here is that the conditions that were presented when those lift stations went in was much different than where we're at today. In many municipalities, lift stations of smaller size or temporary are installed either for that there's a supply issue with sewerable land. I think that was one of the key things that our committee looked at is do we have a supply issue? Has the city not adequately planned out far enough to sewer its land? And one of the items that was contemplated during the master plan for the lift station that was just recently opened near the river was about halfway between that point, this is being the river, and this being the existing edge of town. At one point of the master plan, it looked at doing several small lift stations in this area to provide for more sewerable land. I think it's good vision from the entire team that looked at that and with the public process, and they said, no, let's go out by the river, let's sink one large lift station, and then let's open up sewerable land in multiple phases that will serve the city well for many years to come. And so it comes back to that was really a different time. And when those lift stations at 57th, specifically this lift station here and here were installed, that the amount of sewerable land was not as we have today. And so now our focus is as we showed you that graphic of sewer on the bottom, the more sewer we open up, that means the more BMPs we have to fund. You supported us on raising the DSCR and RDC this last year. We will analyze those just like all of our utility funds this next year. And if adjustments are needed, we will bring those forward. Then the next thing comes is the arterial street. First utility that we are excited to bring you a proposal on is the water distribution system. It has been endorsed by the Alternative Financing Committee. It's been introduced to the IRAB, and the next IRAB meeting will see that in more detail. On the other piece is that we are looking at other options to pay for the assets of an arterial street. But when it all comes down to it, if we could have compact, predictable growth, we can essentially layer all these pieces up and meet growth. If we continue to allow development along the fringes with or without temporary lift stations, without a good guideline, I can tell you that we're not going to get a hold of our arterial street financing and all the other key issues that comes with development.
Thank you, Mark. Councilor Litz.
Mark, I was in IRAP the day that we formed the committee, and I remember you had to pull some hands out of some pockets to get folks on there. But looking through the list here, I see we have 4 city employees. And then I was curious, did everybody that was on the committee for this list, did they have a vote, a final vote in the product that was built?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilor Costello.
Mark, when Councilor Kavanaugh asked you the question earlier, I think your answer was in regards to the conversation that was happening during the IRAB meeting itself. I'm curious more about the discussion that happened on the committee level, or was that what you were referring to?
No, I was talking more at the IRAB meeting because I had sent out a notice to council that said that there was healthy discussion, however, that the board voted unanimously.
Can you give us maybe a little idea of the flavor of the conversation during the committee level?
I would certainly say it was professional. You know, again, we had a backbone policy from Lincoln that they did take 2 years. I mean, there was some significant things that they stepped through to develop. We had the luxury of having a good policy to start from, but also they have a very similar situation as the City of Sioux Falls does in the makeup of their sanitary sewer system. And so as we look through each item, some were contested more than others, and that's what good debate's for.
Councilor Kavanaugh?
I know the whole concept of growth management plan, compact and contiguous growth is something that Jeff talks about all the time. But I'm wondering from your perspective, Mark, as Public Works Director, how important is that?
It's key. Everything that we see, this next week is the public hearing for arterial streets. And until, we'd certainly like the developers to not only speculate where the arterial streets are going to be recommended to be constructed. If we don't start to really have those thoughts, it's going to be too broad each year going forward. And so it's certainly something that I mention often.
Any other questions? Mark, another question I have, and I shouldn't put these mints in my mouth, but I think it's wonderful when we look at what other cities are doing instead of reinventing the wheel. And so obviously Lincoln, Nebraska is a very good Midwestern city for us to study. But I was just curious, and maybe I've been told this and I've forgotten, but were there some other comparable sized cities in the Midwest that we also looked at their policies and, and so forth?
Well, I think one of the things we started with when we went back to IRAB board in April is we had a list of items that were important to city staff and the development community. And then we, naturally we look at several cities around us. Lincoln just had to be the most current. They adopted theirs in 2004, so that's important to me. Just like state legislation, if you need to have a good jumping off point, it's always a lot better, more productive if we can find an adjacent state that's done something that we can build off of. Same thing with city policy. And so Lincoln is one of our real key cities that I personally look to. But we looked at every item, and we added additional items, and we also took away some certain items from Lincoln.
And another question I have, I too believe in very organized, managed growth and so forth. But it's obvious to me every day that I go just a little ways south in our city that the growth out there is tremendous. And so it's like, I realize that we have all this developable, all these, many thousands of acres of developable land, but if in fact citizens, I care more about citizens than just developers, obviously, is that if in fact citizens and, business owners want to develop south, and it's obviously happening right now, it just seems like that it needs to, needs to be noticed greatly by us too. And so I guess, I don't know, it's not even a comment, more of a, it's not a question, more of a comment, but it's not like that area that's been discussed recently is, out in the boondocks by itself. So that's another part of my struggle on this whole topic.
Well, I know, and in many cases it doesn't appear to the general public that sewer is some of the driving force, and that's, I think, one of the keys to this principle and this policy is that there really is science behind it, and then we bring it up from there. And so there's a great supply of developable land, and so that's why I feel strong about the policy.
And my last question for today is, I realize that some are suggesting that the sewer plans or maps would be more logical, more appropriate, fairer to be considered than the CIP. Why is that idea erroneous?
Well, I think we've talked about that topic a lot, is why would we tie this to the CIP? And I think one of the key things is that's our that's number one, our funding mechanism. It's also our published planning document that we put dollars behind projects. When we fund a trunk sewer, like we've got 2 in the plan that are actually a part of this policy that a lift station could be selected next to, those trunk mains are funded with user fees. And one of the things that you've seen in recent is that we've brought 2 rate increases forward, and we will do that. We'll bring any adjustments that are needed to fund those necessary capital projects. And so those are somewhat, I would say, insulated from the capital dollars, because that's not CIP that we're spending to put those trunk mains in. Those are user fees, and Trent Lubers can certainly attest to that if anyone has any additional questions. But each year our rate analysis loads those specific projects, and then we will build those projects unless there's a complete shift in priority.
Councilor Costello.
You know, Mark, I would imagine you're probably pretty comfortable with the outcome of the lift station policy that came out of the IRAB board, correct?
Correct.
I guess in this committee isn't the first time I think this has come up, and I think Bob started to allude to it, and so did Dee, but I wonder the information that we get out of these committees, and it's not just Public Works, but planning and else, that they are so heavily led by city staff, and then we have to twist the arms of developers, contractors, citizens to get involved, because these people have to deal with you next month, 6 months, next year down the road. And I am really starting to question the results that come out of these things. I kind of wonder how some of these people that we ask to serve on these committees, they don't get any money, that takes time out of their schedules when they could be out making money. The quality information that we get out of the committees. It started because I just think they're being led by the city, and I'm not sure we're getting the quality of information that we think we're getting.
Well, just to add to that, I think one of the keys is that our job that we're hired to do is to write policy. And so the second piece of that is that we have good debates, and we certainly take input from these committees. I think that one of the things you've tasked us to do is really look at it from a big picture scenario and not a single landowner scenario. And so that's one of the things we have to bring to the team. And I'm not biased. I want a good growth management policy for the city. I want to be able to actually write an infrastructure master plan that's funded. So.
Put my 2 cents to that. That's an excellent question, and Mark answered it, that we try to do policy. We did this one in 2 months. I think Lincoln, Nebraska's took 3 years to put together, and I'm sure they did it a little bit more expensively than we did. I'm trying to update the growth management plan right now. I would love to have more citizen involvement. Cheyenne, Wyoming just did theirs for $350,000. It's all about funding. All of these just need more money.
Councilor Stagers.
I guess I would also agree with what Councilor Costello said about this, that the city has a strong interest in all this, and the city wants to develop out to the east, clear to the Big Sioux River. But, there are many people that don't want to live way out there by the Big Sioux River. There are some people that want to live at 69th and Southeastern. I was at a football game this last Saturday with the University of Sioux Falls, and I'm sitting in the top of the stadium, and I'm looking over to the east by Sioux Falls Christian High School and just beyond, and quite, understanding that a lot of people want to live there. And then there's also other housing not very far away, too. But because of what the city wants to do, to say this is the way growth is going to go, in the immediate future, unless something dramatically changes here, people are not going to be wanting to live there, which is a very desirable area. So I think we also have to start taking into account not just the city interest, we also have to take into account, where people really want to live. And this is a very desirable area at 69th and Southeastern.
Would there be any other questions by any of, I'm sorry, Councilor Jameson?
Put in 2 cents worth. I always use Rapid City as an example of where they didn't plan for growth. If you look at Rapid Valley east of the city, it's a debacle. And that's because they didn't have any rules in place about the growth and the management of that city to the east. And they're going to suffer with that for many, many, many years. And they'll probably never get it resolved to the satisfaction of most. But the city has hired professionals that are looking after the interests of the city and the best growth management plan that we can have. And I've had this discussion with Kermit before. Every one of us sitting at this table ran on a campaign slogan of planned, controlled growth, and we can't do it by ourselves. We got to look to somebody to get some information from to make it happen. And I personally look to the city staff and the developers in the area to make sure that we are in good working relationship with all of them to make that happen. And so I had to say that.
Any other questions or comments by our team? Councilor Stagers.
Well, I guess I have to say something too. I think one of the most important things that we should be doing on the City Council is, looking after the interests of the citizens of Sioux Falls. Because sometimes there is a sharp difference between the interests of the citizens of Sioux Falls and the city. City staff, city planners, and so forth. And we just cannot automatically defer to the city planners or city staff as if they are, all-knowing, because they're not all-knowing. Nobody is all-knowing. We have to be very respectful of a lot of different opinions. And I wish that this is something that would be taken more into account when we do have these different committees meeting, that, it would be good to try to take into account some of the wishes of the citizens, too.
Well, and I would like to just thank all of you for your months of hard work on this. I know I myself have learned lots about this area, and Councilor Jameson would have another comment.
I've got to remind everyone, this body is the policy-making body for the city of Sioux Falls. The recommendations we get, we either adopt or reject, and once we get those and look at them in the best of our ability, that becomes the policy of the city, and it's not the policy necessarily of the management staff that makes those policies. We set those policies, and it's our responsibility to get the most information we can and make a good valued judgment when we do that.
And Councilor Stagers, I believe we have a debate started here. Councilor Stagers?
Yeah, ultimately, we do make the policy here by ratifying. But what we have to do sometimes is be just a little more critical here. We shouldn't give total deference to every project that is given to us or every plan that is given to us. We should be looking at this, I think, quite frankly, more critically. What has happened here is really a bureaucratic nightmare. We started off, a few months ago trying to get part of the city annex at 69th and Southeastern. Well, we eventually evolved to the issue of the pump station, and, if we just get the pump station and it fits into our sewer system, hey, we'll be all right and continue. Well, that didn't happen. Now we've come up with this policy, which is incredible, and we're making this stuff more difficult than it should be. We don't want to make it difficult for developers and the citizens here in Sioux Falls to live here.
With that, I would like to, again, on behalf of all of the council, thank all three of you for your presentation and also for your hours and hours and hours of work on this topic. And yes, we will, we up here will make that final decision on your proposal, and we really do appreciate your expertise and the time you have spent on this. And we will make the final decision for the citizens of Sioux Falls. And with that, we are going to adjourn our informational, and we will see you all at 7 p.m. this evening. Thank you.
Bob? Is this your card?
We asked him to develop it.
I didn't ask them to do this stuff.
Well,
They said
you
they
were in the minority.